The warning that outlived the stars. The elders of the Shareth did not speak the warning loudly. They whispered it, and only when the night cycle had stretched so long that the younger ones were almost too tired to listen. 7 words, old and worn and smooth from the mouths of 10,000 generations. Never cross the boundary of the amber star. Elder Vaen still believed every one of them. She was not a creature given to fear. In her 80 years of life, she had survived 2 wars, one political collapse that had nearly split the Shareth homeworld in half, and a plague that took a quarter of the outer colonies before the healers finally found a way to stop it. She had outlasted all of it by being careful, by being patient, by listening to the things that others called old stories. She sat now in the deep curve of the council vessel's observation chamber, her 6 silver-tipped fingers pressed flat against the smooth armrest, watching the star map turn slowly in the air before her. It was detailed and accurate. She had spent years refining it herself. And there, near the quiet edge of one unremarkable galactic arm, was the amber star, small, warm, almost boring in its stillness, except for what orbited it. The 3rd planet. Vaen had sent a probe to that system 14 cycles ago, a quiet thing built to observe and record and return without ever being seen. She had not told the full council she was sending it. She filed the mission under a routine survey code and waited. The probe came back 5 cycles ago, and what it brought with her had stolen her sleep ever since. She pressed a small button on the arm of her chair. The footage began to play on the chamber wall. At first, the planet was just a blue and white sphere turning slowly in the dark, beautiful in an uncomplicated way, mostly ocean, with great broken continents of green and brown pressing up through the water like cracked plates being forced upward by something ancient working beneath the surface. Then the probe moved closer. The continents were covered with lines, straight lines, curved lines, long threads stretching from one cluster of light to another. At night, when the dark side of the planet turned toward the probe's camera, the whole surface glowed from within, like a fire that had never been put out. They had cities, many of them, large ones. Then the footage showed something that stopped Vane's breath every single time she had watched it. A metal object, shaped like a column, punched upward through the planet's atmosphere on a tail of fire and chemical smoke. It climbed far past the point where any reasonable object should have fallen back. It kept climbing after it entered the cold of space. It did not stop until it reached the small gray moon that hung in close orbit around the blue planet. The object set itself down on the moon's surface. 4 legs unfolded from its base and found the gray dust. A door opened.
2 small figures in white protective suits climbed out. They moved slowly in the low gravity, careful and deliberate, but not afraid. One of them bent down and pushed a thin pole into the dust. A piece of fabric unfurled at the top, red, white, and blue. They had climbed all the way to their own moon and planted a flag. Then they climbed back inside and flew home. Vaen had watched that footage 11 times. Each time she looked for the rational explanation, the boring one, the one that would let her stop losing sleep. Each time she failed to find it, because the rational explanation for climbing to your own moon and planting a flag in the dust was not really about the moon. It was about saying something to the universe itself. We were here. We came this far. We did it. She called the council to session that evening. The 8 high elders filed into the ring-shaped chamber and lowered themselves into their curved seats. Their crests were dim with age. Elder Moran, the oldest among them, settled into his chair with the slow exhale of someone who had sat through many emergencies that turned out to be nothing, and looked at Vaen with mild, practiced patience. Vaen played the footage without a word. When it ended, no one spoke for a long time. Then Moran waved one tendril in a dismissive arc. "Chemical combustion," he said. "They have not achieved fold space travel. They cannot reach us. Whatever the old texts say, it is not about technology. They are not a threat." Vaen did not argue with him. Instead, she reached into the inner pocket of her robe and produced an archive chip. It was very old, its casing gone soft and pale at the edges from the years. She pressed it into the reader in the chamber wall and let the words appear in ancient Sharath script. The writing was careful, the kind of writing that people produce when they know that what they are putting down will matter after they are gone. "They do not stop," the text read, "not for pain, not for loss, not for the long cold between stars. They buried their dead and kept moving. They broke their own bodies and rebuilt those bodies with wire and metal and kept moving. They found poison and made it into medicine. They found disaster and made it into a lesson. They found death and used it as a reason to go further. Do not let them find you, because once they have a reason to reach you, nothing in the known galaxy has ever made them stop." The chamber was very quiet. Moran's crest had gone a shade paler. "That text," he said slowly, "was written by the Veleth." "Yes," said Vaen. "The Veleth, who were the most advanced civilization in this quadrant 12,000 years ago. Yes. The Veleth, who no longer exist." "Yes," said Vaen, and she let the silence do the rest of the work. One of the younger elders, a slim figure named Cyril, leaned forward with her crest brightening the way it did when she was working through something uncomfortable. "But the Veleth were not destroyed by these beings," she said carefully. "They were destroyed by the Harathi. That is the recorded history." "That is correct," said Vaen. "But the Veleth were watching the humans in the years before their end. They were watching and writing things down, and what they wrote was not a warning about weapons or warships." She paused. "It was a warning about something they had never seen before, something for which they had no existing word." "What?" asked Cyril. Vaen looked at the old text still glowing on the chamber wall. "A kind of will," she said quietly, "that does not know how to recognize an ending. Every species we have ever recorded, when it faces something large enough, accepts that the thing cannot be overcome and changes course. They adapt. They find another path. That is the sensible thing to do. That is what every civilization in our archive has done." She paused.
"These beings look at the thing that cannot be overcome, and they walk toward it." Nobody spoke. Outside the observation windows of the council chamber, the stars burned in their patient millions. And somewhere out there, close by in galactic terms, a species that had only just learned to reach its own moon was already looking further, already planning the next flag to plant in someone else's dust. Vaen looked at the council and said very calmly, "We need to make a decision before they make it for us." For the first time in a very long while, Elder Moran did not argue. The letter at the edge of everything. The object had been drifting for a long time before anyone found it. Deep Space Survey Station Helion 7 had flagged it as an anomaly 9 days before the exploration vessel Steadfast Meridian arrived to investigate. The station's automated report was brief and dry, as such reports always were. Metallic object, non-terrestrial composition, drifting at the outer edge of the debris field, no power signature, no active transmissions, dimensions consistent with a small single-occupant vessel. Lieutenant Dayo Adisa had read the report 4 times during the 3-day transit to the location. He was not sure what he was hoping to find. In 12 years of deep space work, he had learned to expect the ordinary explanation first: unusual mineral deposits, old survey equipment that had drifted further than intended, sensor echoes from dense rock clusters. The universe was very good at looking mysterious and then turning out to be perfectly normal. But the composition readings in the report were not normal. The metal alloys matched nothing in any human database, and the shape of the object, when the long-range cameras resolved it clearly on the 2nd day of travel, was nothing any human hand had ever built. Commander Tara Osai called the crew of 7 together in the briefing room and went over the approach plan with the precision she brought to everything. She was a careful woman who did not waste words or motion. She had close-cropped hair and a habit of pressing 2 fingers against the table when she was thinking, and she pressed them steadily through the entire briefing. "We treat this like any recovery operation," she said. 2-person teams, full suits, no rushing. Nobody touches anything without calling it in first. We photograph before we move anything. We move nothing we don't absolutely have to move." She looked around the table. Questions? Nobody had any. The spacewalk took 35 minutes to set up, and about 10 minutes to make everyone wish they had brought more cameras. The object was small, roughly 4 meters long and 2 wide, shaped like a rounded wedge, like a seed pod that had been gently squeezed on 2 sides. Its hull was the color of old iron, pitted and scored by years of micro-debris impacts. One end held a dark panel that might once have been a viewport. The other had a cluster of nozzles that might once have been thrusters. Dayo floated around the outside twice, photographing everything before he found the hatch. It was on the underside, and it was already open. Not broken open. The hinges were intact. The seal ring was undamaged. Someone had opened it from the inside and not closed it when they left, or when they were taken, or when they stopped being able to. He called it in to Commander Osai, who came over and floated beside him. Both of them looked at the open hatch in the same silence. "Going in," she said. The inside of the vessel was small and dark. Dayo's helmet lamp swept across padded surfaces that had gone stiff with cold over the years, a set of controls that meant nothing to him, and a single seat shaped for a body that was not human, wider at the base, narrower at the top, with 2 shallow grooves where something with more limbs than 2 might have rested them. Then his lamp hit the far wall, and he stopped moving. The wall was covered in writing, not printed, not machine-made, carved slowly and carefully into the metal with something sharp, stroke by stroke, the way someone carves when they have a great deal of time and something very important to say, and no other way to say it. "Commander Osai," Dayo said, and his voice came out quieter than he intended. "You need to see this." She floated in through the hatch, and her lamp joined his on the wall. For a long time, neither of them said anything at all. The symbols were dense and precise, covering almost every centimeter of available surface. Whoever made them had been thorough. Whoever made them had wanted very badly to be understood. "Photograph every centimeter," Tara said at last.
every single centimeter. Back aboard the Steadfast Meridian, the ship's translation AI worked for 6 hours. It was not built for truly alien languages. No human system was, not yet. But the mathematical structures embedded in the symbol patterns gave it enough of a foothold to begin. The AI flagged its confidence level as moderate, which in AI terms meant somewhere between educated guess and genuine understanding.
Dr. Amara Suleiman, the mission's xenolinguist, spent another 3 hours going over the AI's work by hand. She was 34 and young for the role, with the kind of focused quiet that people mistook for shyness until they saw her work. She did not come to dinner. She did not respond to either of the 2 messages Dayo sent checking on her. When she finally called everyone to the briefing room, it was deep into the ship's night cycle, and the shadows under her eyes were significant. She did not sit down. She stood at the head of the table with a tablet in her hands and looked at the 6 people watching her. "Some of it is too degraded to recover," she said. "The metal was scored in places, and some symbols are incomplete. But the core of the message is consistent throughout. I'm going to read you what I have. I want you to let me finish before anyone says anything." She looked down at the tablet. "We thought we were alone near the Amber Star System. We were wrong. The beings on the 3rd planet detected our survey vessel before we detected them. They sent a transmission. We did not respond. Our protocol was observation only. They sent another, and another. On the 15th attempt, they did not send a transmission. They sent a vessel instead. Not a weapon, a vessel with a living crew. They flew out from their planet into the dark to find us, and they were not afraid." She paused. Nobody at the table made a sound. "We observed them for 1 full orbit of their planet around their star before we found a way to make the translation work. They were patient. They did not push. They sent mathematics first, then images, then simple sounds. When one of our crew became ill from a bacterial infection, they noticed the change in our activity patterns and sent medicine across in a sealed container attached to a small unmanned vehicle. We did not ask for it. They simply sent it." Dayo looked at the table surface. He was not sure why. He did not want to look at anyone else's face right now. "When our provisions ran low, they sent food, again without being asked. When one of our crew died, equipment failure, not their doing, they watched our mourning ceremony on their long-range cameras, and then they sent a message. The message took 3 days to translate. It said, 'We are sorry for your loss. We know you are far from home. You are not alone.'" Amara set the tablet down very carefully. Remy Okafor, the youngest crew member, was staring at the ceiling. His jaw was tight. Commander Osei spoke first. "Who wrote this? What species?" "We don't know yet," Amara said, "but based on the age of the metal degradation and the decay patterns in the pod's internal components, the best estimate is that this was written approximately 3,500 years ago." 3,500 years ago. Dayo did the math without wanting to. 3,500 years ago, humanity had been building its first great empires on one small planet. 3,500 years ago, someone else had been out here in the dark, watching the lights on Earth's surface, and had decided to leave a letter at the edge of our solar system. A letter meant for whoever eventually came looking. "They left it here on purpose," Dayo said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Amara said.
The drift calculations place its original position at a very specific point. It was not drifting when it was left. It was parked at the edge of our system, waiting. The briefing room was quiet for a long moment. Then Dayo Adisa looked up from the table, looked at Commander Osei, and said the thing that everyone in the room was already thinking. "We have to answer it." Tara Osei looked back at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she had already decided something and was simply waiting for the right moment to say it aloud. "Yes," she said, "we do."
Everything the myths got wrong. The Galactic Common Archive was one of the oldest structures in the known galaxy. It had existed in one form or another from longer than most current civilizations had been keeping records. It stored everything: trade logs, military reports, scientific findings, personal journals, second-hand accounts, and the kind of careful, long-horizon observations that only the most patient minds had ever produced. Any registered species could access it. The Sharath had been registered members for nearly 3,000 years and had contributed a significant portion of the archive's content themselves. Elder Vaen had searched the archive many times throughout her long career. She had never before searched it for records about the beings of the third planet around the Amber Star. She did that now. She sat alone in the archive alcove of the council vessel, the lights turned low, a warm drink going cold at her elbow. She read for 7 hours without stopping. The humans did not appear often. They had not yet made formal contact with the wider galactic community, and so there was no official record of them as a registered species. But they appeared in the margins of other records, in footnotes, in the background of other people's stories. And those appearances, read one after another, built a picture that was not what Vaen had expected. The first record she found was a Dunari merchant's log from 51 years ago. A trader named Ovish, who ran cargo through the outer systems, had experienced a catastrophic engine failure while passing through the outer reaches of human-controlled space. The region was barely charted at the time, and the nearest registered rescue service was more than a week away. Ovish had sent out a distress beacon and begun calculating how long his life support would hold. Before he finished the calculation, a human ship appeared. It had been in the area, running a standard patrol. The humans called it a Coast Guard vessel, a concept the archive translator noted was derived from their ancient practice of protecting sea travel routes on their homeworld, extended now into space. The crew had detected the beacon and come immediately. Ovish's log noted in his log that they arrived faster than the distances involved should have allowed, suggesting they had pushed their engines harder than was strictly advisable. They pulled his crew aboard. They fed everyone. They spent 4 days making repairs to his cargo ship using parts from their own stores, and they would not accept payment. When Ovish insisted, the human captain, a large man named Bernard Achike, had waved the offer away and said, according to the translation, something roughly equivalent to, "You needed help and we had it. That's the whole story." Ovish's log ended that entry with a single line that Vaen read twice. "I did not know what to do with this. Nothing in my experience had prepared me for it." The second record was a Thorani military report from 70 years ago. The Thorani were not a warm species. They were large and heavily built, and their civilization had been shaped by a long history of territorial conflict. Their military reports were written in a clipped, aggressive style the archive translated faithfully.
The report described an encounter with what the author called, with evident frustration, a primitive human warship of unusual behavioral profile. A Thorani patrol vessel had drifted into a disputed boundary zone. The Thorani claimed navigational error, though margin notes from a Drenni observer in the archive suggested this was unlikely. A human ship intercepted them. The human captain had opened a communication channel immediately. The Thorani commander had prepared a formal territorial challenge. What he received instead was a question. The human captain asked if everyone aboard the Thorani vessel was all right.
The Thorani commander, thrown completely off his prepared script, defaulted to aggression and issued a threat. The human ship did not fire. It did not retreat. It held its position. And the human captain came back on the channel and said, and this was the line Vaen read 3 times, "I hear you. I just don't think you mean it. So I'm going to stay here until we find a better way to talk about this." The standoff lasted 4 hours. It ended without violence. The Thorani vessel withdrew. The human ship did not pursue. The report's author wrote at the end, "The behavior of the human vessel was outside all standard engagement models and could not be predicted or countered by existing doctrine. Further study recommended." Vaen set down her drink. She had not touched it in 3 hours. She moved deeper into the archive, past the recent records, past the century-old logs, and down into the oldest material, where the records grew sparse and the translations grew uncertain. She was looking for the Veleth documents. She had known about them for years. She had never felt the need to read the primary sources until now. She read them now. The Veleth civilization had been extraordinary. They had achieved full interstellar travel 4,000 years before the Shareth did. They had mapped more of the galaxy than any species before or since. Their science had been centuries ahead of everything around them, and their philosophy had been gentle and deeply considered. By the estimation of every species that had recorded contact with them, they had been genuinely good. And they watched the humans. Not up close, from extreme distances, using instruments so sensitive they could read the atmospheric composition of a planet from several light years away. They had tracked the humans across centuries, watching from their quiet vantage as a species that had barely learned to make fire grew into a civilization that lit up the night sky. One Veleth scientist named Fareth had written a detailed analysis of human behavioral patterns that the archive had preserved almost completely. Vaen read it slowly. Fareth wrote, "Every other species in our survey data trends in one of 2 directions as its civilization develops. It either moves toward cooperation at the expense of competitive drive, or it moves toward dominance at the expense of empathy. These 2 tendencies appear to be in natural tension, and one always eventually wins. The species on the 3rd planet around the amber star does not follow this pattern. Both tendencies operate in them simultaneously and at full strength, and neither one cancels the other. They fight each other and then build hospitals for the wounded on both sides. They compete fiercely and then share the results of that competition freely. They are terrified of death, and yet they run toward danger at a frequency that no survival model we have built can account for." Vaen sat with that paragraph for a long time. Then she read the next one. "We have spent considerable effort attempting to classify them within existing frameworks. We have concluded that this is a mistake. They are not a paradox. They are not a malfunction of the developmental model.
They are something the model simply did not predict, because no other species has survived long enough in that particular combination of traits to reach the stage they have reached. If they survive long enough, they will be something the galaxy has not seen before. We do not know what that will look like. We hope to see it. The last Veleth document relating to humans was written in the final years of their civilization, when the Harathi were already pressing in on their borders and the outcome was becoming certain. It was short. The author was not named. We cannot help them. We cannot help anyone now. But we watched them for a long time, and we wanted it on record that they are worth watching. They are worth hoping for. Whatever comes next for us, we hope they make it through. We hope they find their way out to the stars. We hope that when they do, they find someone out here worth finding. They deserve that much. Vaen closed the archive. She sat in the quiet of the alcove for a long time, her hands still, her crest very dim. The Veleth had hoped the humans would survive. They had written that hope into the record, and then they were gone, and the hope had sat in the archive for 12,000 years, waiting. The humans had survived.
The humans had survived, and now they were building ships and pointing them at the dark and asking what was out there. Vaen stood. She smoothed her robe. She walked to her desk, opened a new document, and began to write the formal proposal for the council. She wrote carefully, and she left nothing out. When she was done, she read it back once, made 3 small corrections, and filed it. The proposal requested that contact protocols for the humans be elevated from Category 5, distant observation only, to Category 1, active preparation for first contact. The council approved it the following morning. Every elder voted yes, even Moran. Because the Veleth had hoped for this moment 12,000 years ago, and the least the Sharath could do was make sure it happened right. Crossing the distance. Captain Zola Ferreira made her oatmeal in the small galley off the bridge, added too much water the way she always did, and ate it standing at the counter while looking at the navigation display on the wall screen. The exploration vessel Open Horizon, the upgraded successor to the Steadfast Meridian, was 2 hours out from the coordinates that the decoded message on the old alien pod had pointed toward. 2 hours from the spot where, if the translation was right and the math was right, and 11 years of careful preparation had not gone wrong somewhere along the way, something was supposed to happen. Zola finished her oatmeal. She rinsed the bowl. She went to her bunk and wrote a short message to her son back on Earth, a 16-year-old named Kofi, who had his mother's stubbornness and his father's patience, and who had made Zola a promise the morning the Open Horizon launched to tell him everything, no matter what. "Something big might happen today," she wrote. "I don't know exactly what, but whatever you hear about it, I want you to know that I was not afraid." She sent the message and did not add the second part, the part she kept only for herself. "I was a little afraid, but not the kind that stops you." She went back to the bridge. The crew of the Open Horizon was small, 8 people selected over 5 years from a pool of several hundred candidates. They had been chosen not just for their technical skills, which were all exceptional, but for something harder to measure. The selection committee had looked for people who were calm under pressure, curious rather than aggressive when facing the unknown, and genuinely good at listening. Zola had been the unanimous first choice for captain.
She had almost turned it down, and then her son looked at her across the kitchen table and said simply, "Mom, come on." That had ended the debate. Communications officer Priya Mensa was already at her station when Zola came onto the bridge, running through the signal protocols for the 100th time. She was 27, the youngest crew member, and she had the slightly dazed look of someone running on something stronger than sleep. She gave Zola a quick nod without looking away from her screens. Science officer Dr. James Okello was reviewing the contact framework documents that the world's best xenolinguists and diplomatic theorists had spent a decade building. He looked up when Zola sat down. 2 hours, he said. 2 hours, she agreed.
They crossed the first hour without incident. The second hour passed more slowly. The bridge grew quiet in the way bridges grow quiet when everyone is thinking hard and nobody wants to be the one who says the obvious thing aloud. Then Priya said, "Contact," in a voice that was very steady and very quiet, and every head on the bridge turned toward her. On the long-range display, something had appeared. It was large, roughly 3 times the size of the open horizon, shaped like an elongated crescent, its hull a deep blue-gray that caught the distant light of the amber star in slow metallic ripples along its surface. It had dropped out of what the sensors were reading as some kind of spatial fold transit, not the crude jump technology that human engineers were still working toward, but something smoother and more complete. One moment, the space at those coordinates was empty. The next moment, it was not. Zola looked at it for several seconds. "Open my channel, Priya." "Working on it," Priya said, and Zola could hear in her voice that her hands were very steady, and she was glad of that. It took 9 minutes to lock a carrier wave. It took another 6 minutes before the translation buffer produced anything readable on the human side. 11 years of preparation had gone into that translation buffer. Every scrap of the alien language recovered from the carved pod wall, every mathematical pattern, every repeated symbol cluster, all of it fed into a system that had been refined and tested and refined again until the linguists were as confident as they could be without ever having spoken a real word with anyone on the other side. The first message came through as text on Priya's screen. She read it once. Then she read it aloud to the bridge. "We were not certain you would come out to meet us." Zola leaned forward slightly. "Open my channel, Priya." "Open, Captain." "We weren't certain either," Zola said, "but we figured it was better than waiting." The reply took a little longer this time. When it came, Priya's voice was careful and even as she read it. "That is a very human thing to say. We have read about that." The bridge went completely still. Zola looked at James, who was staring at his console with the expression of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for a moment and was now discovering that nothing had actually prepared him for the moment. She looked at Priya, who had one hand pressed flat against the edge of her station and was not moving it. She looked back at the view screen, where the crescent-shaped vessel hung in the dark like a great, slow question mark. "You have been reading about us for some time," Zola said. "Yes, the archive is large." A pause. "We want to say something to you, and we have debated how to say it correctly. Many species out here were afraid of what your people might become. We have since changed our thinking." "What changed it?" The reply took a little longer this time. When it came, Priya's voice was careful and even as she read it. a Dunari merchant 51 years ago. Your people pulled his crew from a damaged ship and spent 4 days making repairs and sent them home without asking for anything in return. He told that story many times. It spread through several systems. Stories about your people travel further than warnings do, and they last longer. Priya had both hands flat on her console now. She was looking at the screen, and her jaw was working like she was trying to decide whether to say something and had chosen against it. James had stopped looking at his data entirely. He was just sitting there.
Zola looked at the view screen and thought about Bernard Achike, a Coast Guard captain she had never met, who had pushed his engines too hard to reach a distress beacon and then refused payment for 4 days of repair work, and had probably filed a routine report and gone back to his patrol route and never known that the small moment of ordinary decency he had chosen had traveled to the other side of the galaxy and was now, 51 years later, changing the shape of history. "We would like to come aboard," Zola said, "if that is acceptable." "We anticipated that you would ask," the Sharath replied. "We have prepared a reception area. We studied your atmospheric and pressure requirements carefully. We want you to be comfortable." "That is very kind. It is the least we could do." Then there was a pause before the last part came through, and Zola would think about the timing of that pause many times in the years that followed. For the people the Veleth hoped would survive. The bridge of the open horizon was silent for a full 12 seconds. Then Zola Ferreira stood up from her chair. She straightened her uniform. She looked at her crew, at Priya with her hands still flat on the console, at James with his data forgotten, at the 6 other people who had crossed a very long distance to stand at this exact point in time. "All right," she said. Her voice was calm and clear and carried no trace of what she was keeping to herself. "Let's go meet our neighbors." She walked toward the docking corridor, and her crew fell in behind her, and none of them looked back. Elder Vaen had prepared for this for a long time. She had read every available account of human behavior, human customs, human ways of standing and speaking and showing respect. She had studied the way their faces moved when they felt something strongly, the particular shape of a human smile, the way the skin around their eyes changed when what they were feeling was real rather than performed. She had learned the gesture of an open hand, which meant in their culture something close to "I carry no weapon and I mean no harm." She had practiced the pronunciation of several human greeting phrases until her translation collar no longer needed to do the heavy lifting. She had prepared for many possibilities. Standing now in the blue-lit reception chamber of the Sharath vessel, with her council arranged in a formal arc behind her, and the docking umbilicals sealed and pressurized and ready, she ran through those possibilities one more time. She had prepared for humans who were cautious, humans who were aggressive, humans who were overwhelmed by the size of the moment and stumbled over their words, humans who tried to make everything into a negotiation immediately. She had not prepared for Zola Ferreira. The docking umbilical door opened, and the human captain walked through it and stopped just inside the chamber entrance. She was not tall by human standards. Vaen had studied enough images to know that. But she stood as though she were taller than she was, the way people stand when they are used to rooms looking to them for direction. She had 4 crew members behind her, A young woman with careful eyes, an older man with a data tablet tucked under one arm, two others who were looking around the chamber with the wide, alert attention of people who were trying to see everything at once and succeeding.
Zola Ferreira looked at the blue light on the curved walls. She looked at the organic architecture, the gentle angles the Sharath preferred to sharp corners. She looked at the assembled council with their silver-tipped fingers and their luminescent crests and their six-limbed bodies that were so completely different from her own. She took all of it in without flinching, without stepping back, without any of the frozen hesitation that Vaen had half expected, even from a well-prepared human. And then she smiled. Vaen had read about human smiles. She had seen them in footage. She had understood in an intellectual way that humans use the muscles of their face to signal emotional states to one another, and that the smile was among the most common of these signals. But understanding it and standing in front of it were two entirely different things, because the smile reached the woman's eyes. It changed the whole shape of her face. It was not a performance. It was not a diplomatic instrument. It was something that came from somewhere deep inside the human captain and arrived on her face before she had decided to put it there. And it was directed not at any single member of the Sharath Council, but at all of them equally, the way a person smiles when they walk through a door and find exactly what they had been hoping for. Zola Ferreira walked forward and stopped at a respectful distance from Vaen. She pressed her right hand flat against her own chest, a gesture of personal introduction the briefing materials had described. "I am Zola Ferreira," she said, "captain of the exploration vessel Open Horizon, representing the people of Earth. We are very glad to finally say hello." Vaen pressed her 6 fingers together in the gesture of profound respect, the one the Sharath reserved for only the most significant occasions, the kind that happened perhaps twice in a generation. She had decided to use it before the humans arrived, and now she was glad she had. "I am Vaen, elder of the Sharath Council," she replied through her translator, "and we are very glad to finally be found." They sat together for 3 hours that first day. The conversation was careful at first, the way conversations are when both sides have a great deal to ask and are trying not to ask everything at once. There were questions about governance, about population, about technology levels and territorial boundaries, and the long history of how the Sharath had come to be where they were. Zola answered clearly and without evasion, and asked her own questions in return with a directness that the council found unexpectedly refreshing. Most first contact scenarios in the archive involved extensive cautious circling before anyone said anything of real substance. Zola asked about the archive within the first 15 minutes. "The message in the old pod mentioned a Dunari merchant," she said. "You mentioned him when we were on the channel. How did his story reach you?" "The Dunari trade network is large," Vaen said. "Stories move through trade networks the way water moves through stone, slowly, but they get everywhere eventually. His story reached us through a secondary route via a species called the Tarani, who trade along the boundary of your system. We began keeping a more careful record of your people after that." Zola was quiet for a moment. "He never knew, did he, Bernard Achike? He never knew that story went anywhere." "Almost certainly not," Vaen said. Something moved in Zola's expression that Vaen could not fully name. Then she looked up and said, "That seems about right, honestly. The people who do those things usually don't." Food had been arranged along one side of the chamber, human provisions brought from the Open Horizon in sealed containers, and Sharath nutrition preparations arranged beside them.
The formal session gave way to something less structured around the second hour, and people began drifting toward the table in ones and twos. James Okello tried a Sharath mineral crystal and stood motionless for a full minute while the cold, clean taste spread through his mouth. Then he turned to the young Sharath delegate nearest him, a junior navigator named Tevel, and said with complete sincerity that it tasted like very cold grapefruit. Tevel, who had no idea what grapefruit was, made a note to look it up. Tevel, in return, tried a small piece of the flat-baked food the humans called bread. He stood motionless for slightly longer than James had. Then he turned to his colleague in low Sharath that it was warm and soft, and it tasted like something he did not have a word for. His colleague translated that in his own mind as comfort.
In the third hour, Vaen found herself walking beside Zola Ferreira along the observation corridor. The long windows looked out at the stars. The same stars from every direction. The same lights in the same dark, but somehow different when you were standing beside someone who had crossed a very long distance to reach them. "I want to ask you something," Vaen said. The council debated whether to raise it. "Go ahead," Zola said. She said it easily, the way she said most things. "The old records describe your people in a particular way," Vaen said. "They describe you as something that cannot be stopped, something that once it has chosen to move toward a purpose, nothing in the galaxy has been able to turn aside." She paused. "Is that true?" Zola was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the stars. "It's true that we don't give up easily," she said at last. "We lost a lot of people learning to reach space. We nearly broke our own planet before we made better choices. We are not gentle creatures by nature." She paused. "But the thing that the old records might have missed, the thing that people who fear us don't always account for, is that most of the time when a human refuses to stop, it is because they are trying to get somewhere worth going, to help someone worth helping, to build something worth the cost of building it." Vaen considered this. Outside the window, the galaxy turned in its slow and patient millions of years. "The stories," she said slowly, "spoke of monsters." "I've heard," Zola said, and there was something in her voice that was almost a smile, though she was not smiling. "The myths described creatures that felt no fear, that accepted no defeat, and that could not be turned back by any force the universe had produced." "Some of that is true," Zola said. "Some of it is exaggerated. We feel fear, we just try not to let fear be the thing that makes the decision." Vaen stopped walking. She turned to look at the human captain directly. "The myths described everything else, the stubbornness, the endurance, the refusal to accept an ending, but they never said this one thing." She paused. "They never said that when a human refuses to stop, it is most often for someone else, a stranger on a damaged ship, a wounded soldier on the other side of a war, a child who will be born a generation after the person doing the building is already gone." She paused. "The stories described a force. They did not say the force could also be kind." Zola Ferreira looked at the elder for a long moment. Then she said simply, "We try." Behind them, in the reception chamber, James Okello and the young Sharath navigator Tevel were bent over a shared data tablet, comparing star charts and arguing cheerfully about a mapping discrepancy near the outer arm, and laughing. Neither of their languages had a word yet for exactly what that sound was. Two people from different stars finding the same thing funny at the same moment. But both of them recognized it immediately, without needing a word.
The stars outside the window were the same stars they had always been, old and vast and indifferent, burning their quiet millions of years without caring who looked up at them. But in this corridor and in the chamber behind it, something had changed that would not change back. And the myths had said they could not be stopped. The stories had called them monsters. Every word of it had been true in its own way, and yet here at the edge of the dark, the monsters were sharing bread and laughing at star charts and asking each other in two languages that had never met before today, what comes next? The answer, it turned out, was everything. All of it still ahead. Every friendship not yet made, every world not yet seen, every story not yet told about the strange and stubborn and occasionally terrifying and surprisingly warm creatures from the third planet of the amber star, who had looked at the cold dark between the stars and decided it was worth crossing. The Veleth had hoped for this 12,000 years ago, and written that hope into the record before they were gone. The hope had waited, and humanity, being human, had eventually shown up.